something that I find, I'm not 100% sure of this, but something that I find that just makes intellectual perseverance different from the other intellectual virtues. For the other intellectual virtues, there's a feeling component to them. There's an affective component to them that I think can be absent in intellectual perseverance, right? I need to think through the points of view of someone else for intellectual empathy. But as part of that, I'm also going to be taking on some of the feelings that go with that. That's part of putting what they're being fair to their words and everything. Something similar is intellectual courage and intellectual humility and confidence in reason. There's a strong feeling component of it. So a real life example of this is in algebra. You may need several of the virtues, but you could have but intellectual perseverance applies there in a way that maybe none of the other virtues do. Maybe intellectual humility does, but you're not putting yourself in someone else's point of view. You're maybe in reason, but really you're confident that your teacher is teaching you the right formulas to go through. I'm thinking of being in high school algebra or something like that. But so intellectual perseverance is something, though, you've got to maintain to go through in high school algebra, whereas to go through in some other field like high school history or high school civics or high school science, even, you need many of the other intellectual traits to be at work in you. I'm not confident in what I've just asserted, but it seems to me to be so.
Well, I think the affective dimension is manifest somewhat differently, but if we into intellectual perseverance, then maybe in the other intellectual virtues. To me, now if we take anyone who has accomplished something great and has, let's say, take a work of literature, for example, then you're going to need a tremendous amount of intellectual perseverance, typically, to work through all of the complications in, let's say, writing a novel. And so anytime that you are attempting to accomplish something at the highest level, then there can be a lot of angst and, as it were, suffering. It can feel like suffering on the part of the thinker.
Right.
So you are working on a book and you've got this idea and you think it's workable, or you know the idea is workable, and you know that if you live long enough, you may be able to pull it off, so to speak. But you know that it's going to take a lot of work. And this would be not just for literature, but many other fields. And now I'm thinking about prose as well as fiction. So you have this idea and you're working it out. And so as it turns out, the book is going to have, like, say, 10 chapters. And so you work a little bit on the first chapter and the second, and you say, oh, this is all right, not bad. And then you get to the third or fourth and you just say, I just don't know if I can do this. I'm not sure I can make it through. It's like going through a briar patch, and you get about a tenth of the way through and you start thinking, well, maybe I could just go back, just forget it. And then you say, well, okay, come on, just try it. Just keep at it. Yeah, just okay. Now you're 20% in. Well, I still see that I could just forget it, go back. But 30, 40, now you're 50% in. Well, you're halfway there. You're in the middle of the briar patch. Now the natural egocentric side of the mind says, forget it. Or I'll get to it later. Yeah, it's still a good idea. And oh, look at all this stuff I've done. Not bad, but I'm nowhere near the finish line. Now I'm mixing my metaphors. But so this is a common phenomenon in human thinking, where we get about halfway through with something and we just, as it were, get tired of it.
Yeah.
So I'm dragging out this example so that we can really sort of break down what is required to accomplish anything of significance.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm realizing I overstated about intellectual perseverance and not having as much of a feeling component, because even my example, I mean, you were talking about people who work at a very high level, but even if I take my high school algebra student who's going to exercise personal intellectual perseverance in working through the algebra problems the teacher assigns, there is going to be a lot of feeling in there. There's going to be, as you mentioned, angst. There's going to be fear. I'm not going to be able to do it. I might fail my class. I have other things I want to do. I feel a discomfort of working this through. But intellectual perseverance encompasses sort of working my way through those feelings as well as the thoughts. What I based mine on was I will sometimes ask teachers at various levels, which one of the intellectual virtues would you think is most central for your students in your subject matter? And people who are in math typically pick intellectual perseverance, whereas people in other fields might choose any one of them as centrally important. But I'm just forgetting about the anxiety of high school algebra, which I remember experiencing myself.
But even with your example of algebra, again, it entirely depends upon the person. So I remember when I was taking algebra, and